Well, hey there, you're on the internet. I'm trying to get back into this, and welcome to the Triple N Network, where all you newbie nib nerds can find all the news you'll need. Let's look at an ink today, shall we? Somebody asked me to review this ink ages and ages ago, and I didn't have a sample. So when I managed to get my hands on about 79 new samples in early September, and this was one of them, I was like, oh great, I can review this ink this person asked for. Maybe not. Today's ink is from Pelikan's standard 4001 series. Brilliant red. It's orange. Yes. I really hope I got a bum sample, but, for several reasons. But, yeah, anyways, here you go. Yeah, they asked me to review it, so I tried to review it, and here we are. I'm just gonna do this. It's orange. It's so orange. The whole time I was doing this, I was like, yeah, it's orange. It's brilliant red, not so much, unless orange is supposed to be pastel red or something. I don't know. Anyway, so brilliant orange. Yes, so as you can see in the vial, it is orange, and as you might be able to tell, you see this dark bit right here? Now, I shook this very vigorously before we started recording, and actually kind of luckily that there's a downward angle. You might be able to see that this is slightly murky. So usually sediment was settling down here, so before I inked the pens and before I started recording, I gave it a vigorous shake. It's like if you've ever had, you know, like an Orangina, and like the actual orange bits sink to the bottom, that's kind of what happened here. It was like sediment settled. So I want to believe that this is a bum sample because there is a cloudiness to it. It's not red. Like even here you can probably see, like in areas where there's bubbles, it's kind of cloudy. So yeah, brilliant red is orange. Two pens I used were these. This is a Pilot Metropolitan with a medium nib, but it's a Japanese medium, so it's much more like a Western fine. And this JKaweco Ice Sport with a double broad nib, and this actually has a moss gray in it at the moment, which I need to get around to testing. Okay, so here are the comparisons. Okay, as you may be able to see, it's actually, so it shades a lot, but you might also be able to tell that it gets fairly thin in spots, and that's going to be a theme. So, yeah. So here's Brilliant Red, which is orange, and Noodler's Summer Tanager, which is a good bit darker. Next is Diatramentus Scented Jasmine, which is actually quite similar, maybe a bit woollier, but also quite thin. KWZ Orange, which you can tell is a good bit darker, more saturated, more shading. And here's what was most curious. Now this was the sample that matched most closely. Pelikan's Edelstein Mandarin. This is from their, like, not just first class, but like Black American Express first class line of inks. The Edelstein series with the like hand-blown glass bottles and such and such. Now I haven't tested this ink yet. I want to say that it's more saturated because you can see it gets a bit darker than this one. Although maybe, yeah, it gets a bit darker. It doesn't get quite as thin, but it still was the closest of 680 samples. I got a 2-ounce bottle of 4001 turquoise at an ink show for $7. These you get 50 milliliters, which is, so this would be 60 milliliters. This is 50 milliliters, these bottles, and it ain't $7. So I just wanted to point that out because that really surprised me when I was looking through the swatches. Now, bear with me while we do chromatography. Alright, so chromatography. Now this one on the right with a little D, that is the one that I let dry, which is not how you're supposed to do it, but it's how I do it because I feel like it's taught me a lot over the years. But, as you can tell, there's really not a lot of difference. Now, I drew the line of ink and pretty much instantly dunked this one in the water, and then when this test was dry, about 8 minutes or so, I then dunked this one. Yeah, not a lot of difference. Now, if you've seen if you've seen my chromatography or anyone's chromatography for Noodler's Dragons Napalm, this looks very similar. The thing is, Dragon's Napalm is known for being partially fluorescent under black light. And in that one, it's this highlighter yellow up at the top, because yes, this is highlighter yellow, that's not your screen freaking out. That's the bit that fluoresces in Dragon's Napalm. However, this does not fluoresce. I was really hoping there'd be some like secret thing hidden in here, but there really isn't. So you can definitely see where the initial line was put. It's in this like almost salmon color, or if you're like one of my friends from Texas, salmon. Definite clear line, almost transparent through here. Then you get little clumps of it where it meets this highlighter yellow. Here, the line is maybe a little darker, just a shade, and here it's a little clearer. There's less clumping right where you meet the highlighter yellow, but yeah, largely the same. Resistance tests. Now, you might be looking at this and think, wow, that's really washed out. Her white balance is out of control off. It's really not. I really hope I got a bump sample. That's all I have to say. But yes, here we go. Resistance tests. Water. Got a good bit of it moving, but rather like the chromatography, left that pink behind. And where it was laid on heaviest, because you can see the continuous pattern, that's where more remains. Bleach, fascinatingly enough, didn't get rid of it. Turned it into this like soft canary pastel kind of color, and where it was laid on heaviest, it sort of stayed that salmon color. Where it was thinnest, it's practically gone, but I thought it was interesting that it was a little resisty. Now, ammonia pen flush. This was fascinating. Here, you can kind of see where the water moved a bit of it, but here, you can really see it. There's a very clear demarcation where it stopped. It actually moved bits around, and it didn't turn pink, it just lightened the orange, which was rather fascinating. Hydrogen peroxide, though. I'm going to bring this in. Hopefully you can see this. It started to break apart the paper and, like, move it around. So, yeah, it's not the most waterproof of inks, but it's better than nothing. Paper test. Top down in density. Clairefontaine, 90 grams per square meter. I'm over-caffeinated. Yes. So if you know me or my reviews, you know that I love me some quadrilateral paper. I will write like a bell curve if I don't have very clear guidelines. So dots don't really do it for me. And I love being able to space out my writing like this. So like here I write 2, 2, and then when I want to break, there's 1. So I really like quad paper. The problem is it leaves lines. But for me, that's like a litmus test, you know? Like, if you can see the lines even through the darkest parts of the writing, we're gonna have problems. Again, it is just orange. This is just orange. But yeah, and it's undersaturated. It's very watery, it's very thin. I mean, it almost looks like it's washing itself off the page in these smudges. But, as is true for a lot of very thinly saturated inks, there is a very broad breadth of shading, as we can see in these scrubbies. So if saturation doesn't matter as much to you as shading, this would be an ink to consider, assuming it is in a bum batch. You can see it in the writing as well. You can even see it in that Japanese medium. So there's that. But what fascinated me was that this ink, despite not having a lot of ink in it, took a while to dry. So this Japanese medium, more like a Western fine, took 18 seconds to dry. And admittedly, this is a double broad, but it took 32. So it took a while to dry, and that's something we're going to see, but Yeah, again, I hope this is a bad sample. But yeah, lots of shading, but there's no bleed, feather spread, there's no echo, and no sheen because it's so thin. Because it's so thin, it doesn't leave a dark color behind, which means you're not going to have any problem seeing it the other side. And because it's so thin, there's not enough pigment to stack upon itself when it dries to give it sheen. So yeah, you're not going to get any bleed or feather spread, but you're also not going to get any sheen. So, water test. Weirdly, this grid really washed off. You can see that something used to be there. But here, you get a little bit of something. Quarter of the T is gone, the loop of the R is gone, top of the E. A little strange how that happened, but you'll at least be able to tell that there was something there. So, it's something that stays behind. Fabriano Eco Qua. It's an 85 gram per square meter paper. It's my favorite. Yes, I pick favorites. I feel no shame. But again, I mean, this is really orange and really undersaturated. Like, even before I bring it in close, you can see those lines even in the darkest parts. Now, admittedly, Clairefontaine has purple lines, which are sort of like a light violet, and these are gray. So they might seem a little darker, but you also might be able to tell they're thinner. But still, this is my litmus test, and it didn't pass. But again, because it's more thinly saturated, you do get a very wide degree of shading. So if you are a lover of shade, this could be your deal, assuming it's not a bum sample. Now, that Japanese medium took 15 seconds to dry. That double broad JKaweco took 25. And again, the smear was like it's trying to wash itself off the page. But yeah, again, no bleed, no feather, no spread, definitely no echo, and definitely no sheen. But yeah, on this paper it turned very pink. Like here, there are still some like hints of orange. But here it just turned pink. It is all pink all the time. So here you can more clearly tell where the lines were, but they are still much lighter. Here the dots and the lines from the JKaweco, which is the broader pen, are more, there's more remaining, which I think is because it put down more ink. But interestingly, here in the words, the more even but thinner line from the Japanese medium more remained. I thought that was rather curious. And here, again, it's not orange, it's just more salmon colored. I just think that sounds so funny. But people think I pronounce things funny, so that's not me making fun of you. It's just you're saying it exactly the way it's written. And I don't know why that's... Anyways, moving on. Rambling. Rhodia, 80 grams per square meter. This has a ceramic coating added in the pressing process. Again, we have purple lines in the background, much like Clairefontaine, but they're a bit lighter, and the lines are a bit broader. But still, we can see them through every square nanometer of that writing, which is unfortunate. But again, lots of shading. We even have shading in that Japanese medium. So there's that. That Japanese medium, 17 seconds to dry. The double broad took 29. Again, very thin on the smear. Now, I'm just going to hold this back. Now, this is so thin and so pale. In fact, for my eyes, it's not bright enough to contrast with the purple in the background. So this is actually painful for me to read unless I bring it in really close. So that's not working for me. But yeah, here I mentioned that the flow is about a 6 out of 10. So it's readily coming out of the pen. It's still very orange. And here we get more of a halo effect, which is a dark outline around the wettest parts. You can especially see it down here, which, as this says, no bleed, feather spread, echo, or sheen, which is true. And here, the lines are very faint, but they're there. And again, the lines and dots with the double broad JKaweco are easier to read, but fascinatingly enough, I think this might be the lightest of all the tests so far. The least remaining. So I thought that was rather curious. And next up is Tomoe River paper. I think this stuff is like 52 gram. It's something. So it's like nearly half the density of Clairefontaine. It's extremely thin. Also, it's a cream colored paper, something I just wanted to point out. So these are, so Clairefontaine and Rhodia are more of a white, Fabriano is more of an ivory. This is a cream, and I feel like it's brought out the orange even more, whereas this like hints at more of a salmon. This is just like a straight bright orange. So yeah, and the way this paper works, it's known for really drawing out shading and sheen and dry time and echo. But the thing is, it's making this look completely washed out and watery. Like if I don't bring this in close, that's really faint writing. Like even in the double broad, like in the places where it's thinner, like the top of the N, the top of the curve of the G, there's just, it's not substantial enough to be easy to read. Because it's just so thin. I mean, yes, there's a lot of shading, but it's like there's still not enough. But yeah, I did draw out dry times. The Japanese medium took 23 seconds. The double broad took 46, which when you look at how thin this is, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. But anyways, there's no bleed, no feather, no spread. There's no echo because it's just not dark enough, except for the scrubby where I was laying it on and laying it on and laying it on, trying to make it do something. But yeah, so there's no real echo. And there's not going to be any sheen no matter how hard I lay it on because there's just not enough pigment in there for it to stack up and sheen. Now this paper is known for just letting ink slide away when you add water. And it kind of did. But I was also kind of surprised by how much remained considering how little there is in the first place. So you can read all of this if you really look and really concentrate and really want to see that. It is very faint and very light. And this is definitely a salmon pink. Like this is just a straight orange. But so it's better than nothing, I suppose, but it won't be easy. Now, these three tests, I only use that Japanese medium because these are very economically made papers, so they're more absorbent. So I only use that Japanese medium except to write the name. Now, this is the world's worst copier paper. Just take my word for it. I feel like I've seen enough paper to know that this probably is the world's worst copier paper. It is just complete trash. But here, still very orange, and it's still quite thin. You can still see that it's fairly thin, but you do get shading on here, which is quite rare for this paper, and actually a lot of copier papers, you don't get that. It did take 1.5 seconds to dry. There's some feathering, but not a ton, which is rather impressive because this is a slightly wet flowing ink and this is terrible paper. There's a bit of woolliness. I say there's no shading, but obviously that's not true, hence the being crossed out. Now, more absorbent papers tend to draw the ink in, make it harder to wash out. I definitely think that's true here. You can very clearly see where those pink lines are. It did expand a bit. You can see how the water warped the paper. But yeah, if you had to recover that, you could. It might not be the most fun task ever. Now, here in the scrubby, we do have a couple of spots of bleed. But here, even with that double broad Kaweco, we only have 1 or 2 spots of bleed. So there's not a lot of, there's almost no real bleed, because let's be real, who would do that? But there is some show through, just because it is sinking into the paper. It's just not coming out the other side. Now, this is Mead Notebook Paper. It is very standard for school children in the United States. This is the kind that comes out of a spiral notebook, not the kind that comes out of one of the lab composition books. Those feel more like newsprint. This one, these are more likely to feather, but I just want you to see this. It doesn't spread as much as it did on the 20 pound. It's sort of a nice medium between the Tomoe River and the 20 pound. We also get pretty much no feathering. And again, I had to cross out the no real shading. Because there is some, you can see it. Just a bit. It is still very clearly orange, but yeah, there's no feathering. There's maybe a touch of woolliness, but that's about it. 4 seconds to dry. And absolutely no bleed. Come on, camera. There we go. No bleed. Even here in the scrubby, it's like if I lay it down and like really press it to this white background, you can start to see something, but that's about it. So honestly, this is really not bad. You don't have feathering, you have almost no spread, you have utterly no bleed, despite the fact that it's a slightly wet flowing ink and this is very absorbent paper. Now again, this could be a bum sample, so who knows, but could be a thing. This could be a thing. Now, here in the crosshatch, camera, you can see where the lines were, but, and again here, it didn't feather, didn't explode, which a lot of inks, when you add water to this paper, that's what it wants to do. It did buckle the page just a little, but if you had to recover that, you could. And lastly, we have Moleskine, which I hate, because they make you pay a lot of money for it, and it is made probably about as cheaply as this 20-pound. But, to give it its due, here it could be worse. Now, I want to show you, it actually didn't spread as much as it did on the 20-pound. And it might have even spread even less than it did on the Mead. And yes, we have shading, but again, because this is a cream-colored paper, rather like the Tomoe River, it sort of brings out even more of the orange. And yes, there's shading, but it sort of just highlights that this is an undersaturated ink. Now, the double broad did cause some feathering and some intense woolliness, and there is woolliness in the places where it is darker, and definitely in the scrubby. 7 seconds to dry. But there's also bleed through, which we didn't get before. So we have spots, that's with the medium, that's with the double broad, but we have some in the scrubby, but we also have some in the writing, which is unfortunate. But yeah, and then this is sort of the first time it really blew up. It starts to sort of feather and explode, and like the paper physically started coming apart. I wish this was something that I could get on camera. Do you see that at all? The fiber is coming off. So that's nuts. But also, it's basically reenacting the chromatography. Like, look here. That's weird. Like, you see how there's pink and then orange and then there's just the highlighter yellow being pushed out to the side? That's, I don't understand, Moleskine. Why? Anyways, so, there you go. There's maybe Pelikan's 4001 Brilliant Red? Question mark? Yeah, somebody asked that I review it, and so I got a sample, and this is what happened. It's orange, and it's really undersaturated, but even if this is a bum sample, could be a lot worse, you know? And, yeah, so there you go for your consideration from the Triple N Network. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe to the channel. And thanks for watching. Bye.